think H's are silent in French. Not? Hello, I'm Angel, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're a subscriber. I thought that I would talk about the books that I read this year, so let's get to it. There's a theme, of course there's a theme, to what I read this year, so leave a comment down below if you guess what the theme is. I'm gonna break this down into two categories, fiction and nonfiction. Look for the timestamps in the description box below for when I get to the nonfiction. And you can follow me on Goodreads if you like, just to see what else I wrote about these books. This year I read, if I include the two books that I'm working on now, and I'm hoping to finish them by the end of the year, so I'm gonna count them, because I can't start my 2020 books until I finish my 2019 books. I've read 17 books. This year, for the first time in a very long time, I read 8 fiction books. I don't normally read a lot of fiction, so I really pushed myself to get in there and read more of it. First up, The Alice Network by Kay Quinn. I gave The Alice Network 4 stars. I thought it was quite lovely. Lee Child's Gone Tomorrow, which is actually the 13th book in a series, a pretty long series. Kind of parachuted in. Even at that point in the series, I felt like I could keep up. I gave it 3 stars. I enjoyed it. It's the oldest novel I read this year. It was also originally written in German. I didn't read the German version. I read it in English, and it was translated by a couple of scholars in England. So that was the translation I read. I thought it was really interesting. There's definitely a difference in the way that we tell stories today and what is preferred by particularly an American reading audience, but I still enjoyed it and I gave it 3 stars. Kit Sargent's 355, a novel, The Women of Washington's Spy Ring. It was interesting. This was the first novel I read that had multiple points of view. I wasn't particularly keen on that aspect of it, but the characters had enough of a unique voice to be able to tell them apart. There was one character that I didn't like at all. But that's okay. There are supposed to be characters that we don't like and characters that we do like, right? So I enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars. I read an anthology, and this was an education for me. I've never read an anthology of short fiction. This was fan fiction. It was titled Sherlock Holmes in America. I don't mind short stories, but for some reason, a book of short stories, it was a slugfest. I had a really difficult time getting through all the different stories and finishing the book. I eventually finished it just because I got embarrassed about how long it was taking me to read. I gave it 2 stars. Mr. Churchill's Secretary by Susan MacNeil. It's the first book in a series. I'm not sure if I'll read the rest of them. I gave it 4 stars. The Lost Girls of Paris by Pam Jenoff. I also enjoyed this book very much and gave it 4 stars. The last book in this category, and the second oldest as far as publication date goes, is The Remains of the Day. I gave it 3 stars. I've divided my nonfiction section into 3 categories: history, memoir, and the craft of writing. Because apparently I decided that I needed to take up writing as a hobby. And I don't know how to write fiction. So I needed to do a little bit of research. So we'll start with the craft of writing. Roy Clark's writing tools. I found this book to be quite helpful, so I gave it 4 stars. People always recommend Stephen King's On Writing. So I went ahead and got that. I did get it on audiobook, so I don't know if that makes a difference to anyone watching this video, but it was very nice because I was able to walk my dog and listen to it, and also listen to it in the car. So I was able to get through it a little bit faster than if I had just tried to read the physical copy of the book. I also found it quite helpful and gave it 4 stars. Chuck Winding's Damn Fine Story. It was really interesting. I had a great time reading it. He was a very entertaining writer. Stephen King's book was also very well written. It's a memoir and tips on writing, so it was integrated quite nicely. And Chuck's did the same kind of thing, but Chuck is a different kind of storyteller, and so I thought that his writing was a little bit more humorous. I also gave it 4 stars. The last book in this category is actually a vocabulary book, and I also had it on audiobook, which really came in handy for some reasons that I can talk about in just a minute. Wilford Funk's 30 Days to a More Powerful Vocabulary. And what I thought was very helpful about having this particular book in audio form is that someone is speaking the words. I have a problem pronouncing a lot of words, just in general. And I don't know if it's because I lived in so many different places and kind of made a mishmash of different accents along the way, or if I don't hear words properly. So listening to this audio book and being able to go back and hear the word repeated over and over again was very interesting. One of the words that I can now pronounce correctly, let's see if I can do it under pressure, eavesdropping. I used to say eavesdropping, but that's not right. It's eaves, like an eave of a roof, dropping. So I got that one now. And mischievous. I used to say mischievous, but it's mischievous. There we go. 2 words. The next category was memoir. When I was in college, I took a Russian history class. I also have a very good friend who immigrated from the Soviet Union to the United States, and her father wrote a memoir. So, full disclosure. What I liked about this, having had the class where I read a lot of books about Russian history, it went not quite up to the communist period. Sometimes we don't get a personal picture of what life was like for the people in that country. The historians will say, oh, the people were cold and hungry and they were eating bark off the trees and they had no fuel for fire, things like that, which is horrible, don't get me wrong, but what it doesn't do is tell us how the people felt. It doesn't say how parents felt feeding their children bark. It doesn't tell us how people felt waking up yet again in the cold. And that has a place, and I think that a memoir is a good place for that particular type of history. Zinovy is not a professional author. He wrote his book mostly for his family, his grandchildren, but it's out there. So I was like, hey, I know him, I'm gonna read it. And I really enjoyed it. A lot of aspects of it I already knew just because my friend had shared her story, which overlaps with her father's story quite a bit. He rages against socialism a little bit. He rages against the persecution of Jews a little bit. But in this, you can really see that he is an optimistic man and that he just wants what is best for his family. He's not a perfect man. He admits that in this book, but he wants to do what he can to help his family out. If you want an immigrant view, this is a great book. If you want to know what it was like to live as a minority under communism, this is a great read. I really enjoyed it. Now my books on history. Kurt Anderson, Fantasyland. Ooh, he comes hard for baby boomers and theologians. So if you're a boomer or a theologian and you're anywhere on the conservative spectrum, this book is not for you. But everybody else I think will really appreciate this book. Nancy Eisenberg's White Trash. I have been very fascinated with the mythology of the American dream and really enjoyed this book as a part of that dismantling of the myth. Nadine Ackerman's Invisible Agents. Really good. Particularly enjoyed the way she engages the historiography. Wow, fantastic. If you are looking for an example of an area where you think people have done the history of something wrong, this is a great book to read. A Bite-Sized History of France. It is a history of food mixed with general history of France. Like a lot of aspects of history, there are dark parts, and this book covers some of those dark areas. One of the areas that is important and I was worried would be skipped over and wasn't, slavery and the sugar industry. Very important, was touched on beautifully. Could it have been longer? Absolutely, could have been, but it was not excluded, and I think if this was a longer history on food in France, it could have been much longer. But I'm really glad that it wasn't left out. My favorite nonfiction book of the year is the Memoir, and my favorite fiction book of the year is The Alice Network. That's my list of books. What was your favorite read in 2019? Leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. I'll see you soon. Bye.